Good evening, everyone. I'm David Suddjian. Welcome to Bird Bombs, Helpful Bursts of ID Info, episode 24. I wish they all could be California gulls. I'm assisted tonight by Laura Stedman. Laura's going to be in the hot seat again during our Let It Fly segment later on, and she'll also help in presenting any questions you may have. So do use our questions and answers. And I want to do use our Q&A, send in some questions if you have them. I do want to assure you that this will be about Colorado gulls, but wouldn't it be nice if they were all California gulls? I mean, think about it. It would be so much easier if they were all California gulls. You know, not as much variety, not as much challenge, but a lot less anxiety and stress. And wouldn't it be great if here in Colorado we could have a California gull watching experience? I mean, to be on the beach there in the winter at low tide, and the gulls are right there at your feet. And there's not that many gulls out there in that little flock, but I'll bet you there's 6 or 7 species right there at Aptos Creek mouth along Monterey Bay. Oh, wouldn't it be nice? But we're in Colorado and we make do with what we have. You know, I've been listening to the Beach Boys all day, and it turns out that they actually look a lot like gulls. I noticed that their tone of gray here is just like the California gull gray. Don't they look a lot like gulls? So even the Beach Boys are getting in the spirit. Now, it's come to my attention that, you know, a lot of people are still anxious about gulls. You're maybe wanting to see some species you haven't found yet, or maybe it's just confusing still. Or I've also been told that sometimes watching a Bird Bombs episode, a video, can help put you to sleep in the evening if you're have anxiety or having a time going to sleep. So whatever it is, whether it's gull ID anxiety or you just need to get some extra rest, I want you to take your breath in and let it out. Just relax. Set down that heavy burden on the beach. All right. Isn't that what we all want to do, is to lay our burden down on the beach and know that we're surrounded by good gulls. And you know what? You are already a success. You can identify 97% of the gulls here in Colorado. How can you go wrong? And you know, if anything else is worrying you, just be at ease and let the gull NATO lift you away to a place of peace and rest. All will be well. And I do hope that everybody has watched the prior episode of Bird Bombs, Get Gullible, and you're already made great strides to being gullible. And if you watched, then you know I put emphasis on 3 important steps to get gullible. So let's review those. The very first one is to know what to expect. 21 different species of gulls have been recorded in Colorado, but we can understand which ones are really rare ones that we don't have to worry about, and we can focus in on 12 core species that we want to learn about for identification purposes to become adept and really gullible. And 2 of those I've highlighted in white there are ones that aren't really around during the late fall winter season where we are now. And this Bird Bombs tonight, I'm going to focus especially on our winter situation with the gulls. So those 2, Sabine's gull and Franklin's gull, are ones that we don't really see this season. So we're going to kind of not too worried about those anymore. But the rest of those are all species that are around during the winter time. And there are those 6 species that make up the great majority of all the gulls in Colorado. So if you want to be gullible, you really want to focus in on these 6 species and maybe a couple more. So the Bonaparte's gull, ring-billed gull, California gull, herring gull, Iceland gull, and lesser blackback gull are the species that really numerically, literally make up 99+% of the gulls in Colorado. So we don't have to worry about even all of the 12 different core species to the same degree to really know when you're encountering something different. So the second point was to learn our reference species. So we have 2 of them. A reference species is one that we become really familiar with because we can observe them regularly, often in good numbers. And so we can learn them very well, and they help us to understand when we see something different. So here in Colorado, our 2 gull reference species are the ring-billed gull and the herring gull, as we focused on and get gullible. So we have a smaller reference species, the ring-billed gull, a 3-year gull, and a bigger one, the herring gull, a 4-year gull, and that's going to be valuable for us tonight in our discussion. All right, so you know, these are important goals for us to really know well, because they're going to take us 95% of the way there. think of it, you can identify so many of Colorado gulls without even knowing too much about what we're about to step into in just a little bit. So the third step was to understand how to age gulls. This is really helpful because it gives you a framework in which to evaluate what you're looking at. When you look at a flock of gulls, and sometimes maybe it's just all adult ring-billed gulls, it could happen, no big deal there. But more often, there's some other things mixed in that look a little different. It may be the ring-billed gulls that are looking a little bit different and other species that are mixed in. And sometimes there's different ones that are brown and some that look intermediate. So when you can figure out the ages of the gulls, it gives you a way to sort them out and make some sense out of what you're looking at. Plus, the field marks vary according to the age to some degree. So it's important to kind of have a sense of where you're at. So here we have the journey from brown to gray, basically, is what's going on. And remember that most of the gulls we see in September to March during our winter season are adults or first cycle birds. So a lot of birds that had successfully left the nest are still with us. Those numbers are going to dwindle, and then when they get to adulthood, they live for fairly long lives. So we have a lot of adults and first cycle birds, and that's going to be mostly where we focus tonight. But we're going to look at all the different age steps as we go along here for right now. When we're talking about cycles, we're thinking about basically a year from September to September. It's marked by the conclusion, more or less, of the pre-basic molt. Okay, so that's concluding in early fall. A little variation there, but so September to September, these different cycles. So a first cycle bird is in its first year of life and into its second calendar year of life around to that next September. All right, and so on the left here with the ring-billed gull, we see a very fresh plumage bird early in the season. After it's left the nest, it's still all brown. By the time they get to us here in Colorado, they have a gray back like this one highlighted in the yellow frame here. So that's the way our first cycle ring-bills go. Look like. And then in the second cycle, they look a lot more like an adult, right? But some things are just not quite right. And then as the adult, they're nice and clean, and the bare parts are nice and bright, and the wing tips, the primary, have some white markings out there. All right, so let's look at that again with the herring gull. Now, the herring gull is a 4-year gull, so we add an extra year. And the way that happens is that it kind of makes this connection here so that the first cycle ring-bill gull is analogous to the second cycle herring gull. The ring-bill gull is able to molt sooner than the herring gull after it leaves nest. So they start out all brown, just like this first cycle herring gull, but they molt a little faster than the herring gull and acquire that gray back in their first year. So that's a difference there. But we see here in the herring gull first cycle, all brown, and then second cycle is getting that gray back, but dirty looking. Third cycle looks a lot like an adult, but there's some problems. Not much white out here on the wing. The bill doesn't look right. Things aren't as bright. And then the adult has nice bright bare parts, a lot of white there on the primary tips, and nice normal adult sort of coloration, nice and clean. All right, so let's refresh a little bit on some of the places on the Gull we're going to journey to. We really don't need to get into a lot of technical talk tonight, and I'm going to present some names here without actually coming back to them a lot, but you want to know where things are. It's really important. So on the bill of the Gull, one of the things that's a little different is this section here that we call the gonies, and there often is a little bit of an angle or an expansion that points downward, more or less on different species. And that's called a gonidial angle or expansion. There's a little pronunciation key for you. And that red spot there, we can call a gonidial spot if we want to get fancy. Also on gulls, they have an orbital ring around the eye, some bare skin that acquires some color. It may be especially colorful during the breeding season, maybe not so much in the non-breeding time. And so gulls also get this wintertime head smudging that we see at this time of year. And they may have a colored gape like this California gull does here, which if it closes its bill, you'll see that kind of pinky red there at the base. And when they're in breeding condition, that may be really bright. But we don't worry too much about that. But the fries go in there. So here's a beautiful Iceland gull, and it's an adult in winter plumage. See that winter head smudging, and we can see that it's an adult by its nice kind of bright, clean appearance, other than the smudging, and those nice large white tips on the primaries. So here's some parts here on the upper parts. We have the mantle is kind of the central back area here. And generally we can call this region the upper parts, including the scapulars, which are along here, and the mantle. The scapulars, it's kind of hard to see in this picture, actually have some pale tips that form a pale area there, and the tertials down here have pale tips. So these are some of the flight feathers, tertials. We can't see the secondaries, and then these are the primaries sticking out. That's not a dark tail on a gull. Those are the primaries. So here is the wing opened up in flight, and we can see that on a lot of the gulls we look at, they have both primary tips that are white, and there's other pale markings on the interior of the wing. So those ones that we see like here out on the outer two primaries here, number 9 and number 10, we call mirrors. Mirrors. Here's another wing view of the Iceland gull, and we can see where the mirrors are. Notice on this underwing view of the Iceland, a great ID point here. See how the black is just restricted to the subterminal area on the tips of these feathers? There's those white tips, then it's black, and then there's white mirrors or other pale areas versus a lot of extensive black. So that's a great mark on a flying Iceland gull. Also affects the perch gull. But there's those mirrors there. And notice that we can't see the mirrors when the wing is closed, like on this western gull up in the top. You can just see the primary tips, but the mirrors are hidden away on the upper surface of that wingtip. All right, so I do recommend going back to view Bird Bombs Where's That on the Bird from February 2022. You can find in our Bird Bombs archive to get familiar with the parts of the bird, the topography of birds. So really good to know about that stuff. So let's take another refresher look at our two reference species, the ring-billed gull and the herring gull. And we're just going to focus here mostly, or in this slide, and a lot of following ones, on first cycle birds and adults, because those are most of what we see. And once a bird is in its second cycle, you can tell based on coloration what it is, and also using other features. So we really want to focus just on first cycle and adults for ID. Keep it simple tonight. So the ring-billed gull is the one that's common everywhere. And it's smaller than most of the other gulls, and it's kind of medium, long, narrow bill. There's no red there. It's kind of a slim build. And the first cycle ring-billed gull has a gray back. Some have flecks of brown, some are solidly gray, especially later in the season, be solidly gray. But notice retains a lot of brown there. And the adult ring-billed gull is looking nice and dapper. That ring on the bill, nice bright yellow legs. Pale gray upper parts is the coloration for the ring-billed gull. The herring gull is also a pale gray upper part bird. The herring gull is one that we have usually present whenever there's a four-year gull present. So we always have the ring bills, and if we have some of the bigger ones, we usually have the herring present. So it makes a great reference species. First cycle herring starts out all brown. It's a big gull, and its bill starts out dark, and it has kind of a mean look to this gull overall. Right, and the adults have a nice, very pale white staring eye, I've heard it referred to as. Notice on this winter adult, the bill markings aren't as bright as they would be during the nesting season, but there is some red there, and we also see a little bit of dusky markings. This is a pink-legged gull. All right. Over on the right, we can see the herring gull there with our two other species. Give us a little size reference. The herring gull, quite a bit bigger. Of course, the Californias are seeded, but still quite a bit bigger than they are, and certainly larger, looming over the ring-billed gull. And then the bottom right, you can see a comparison of that second cycle herring gull with a gray back and brown wings, analogous to the first cycle ringbill. The ringbill skips a year. All right, so here we have our two reference species together. Easy peasy. All right, so these are the winter gulls you need to know. All right, these are our core winter species. We have our two reference species here, and one other one that's not pictured. So the Bonaparte's gull, we're not going to talk about anymore tonight. It's a small gull. It's not hard to identify in the wintertime relative to these others. We're going to let that aside. We've heard a lot about ring-billed and herring. We're going to keep them in the mix as our reference species, but we're going to focus on these other species, the short-billed gull, California gull, Iceland gull, lesser blackback gull, Glaucous gull, and great black-backed gull. So these are our focal species for tonight that we're going to explore more deeply. And notice that 3 of these are actually rare in the wintertime. They're findable because we have great communications now, and there's tons of birders out there. So we find several short-billed gulls every late fall and winter. And if you're on top of the eBird reports, you can follow up or maybe find one on your own. But short-billed gull, glaucous gull, and great black-backed gull are kind of rare. And so it's always a treat when we see any of those species. The other 3 listed here are more regular, although not necessarily easy to find. All right, so let's consider that the short-billed gull was formerly the mew gull. So in some of your bird books, it might still be listed as mew gull and has that odd 4-letter code S big. It's pronounced zbig. You know, it's kind of at odds with the short bill concept, but it's to avoid overlap with 2 other gull species. So that's a little different in the 4-letter code word. And when we're talking about Iceland gull tonight, I'm talking exclusively Thayer's subspecies of the Iceland gull. All right, so it had been lumped into what we formerly called the Iceland gull, and there was a Thayer's gull, and now it is in there, and there's 2 other forms besides the Thayer's form. They're rare in Colorado, one that doesn't occur at all. One is rare in Colorado. We're leaving that aside, so I'm just talking Thayer's when I'm saying anything specific about Iceland gull tonight. So when we're looking at gulls, and here on these pictures, we have all adults except for the glaucous on the lower right, because that's mostly what we see, the first cycle that's shown there. But when we're looking at these birds, we want to focus on eye color, leg color, be aware of bill color, the markings in the shape of the bill, the tone of the gray. Be aware that in photos that can not always be quite true, but in the field, you're looking at the tone of the gray and in photos. And your impression of the bird, what's its jizz, its general impression, size, and shape. So gulls have different looks, and you have to be a little bit fanciful. You have to go with me here, but they have different looks. So the short-billed gull, it's a dainty gull, dove-like. It has a dark eye, and so that rounded head and dark eye and small bill give it a really gentle look. The bill is very plain, and the bare parts are kind of a drab yellow. The ring-billed gull looks kind of streamlined. It has that jaunty ring on the bill, and because it has a pale eye, it gives a little bit of a mean look, but not as pale as the herring gull's eye. But in the little gull world, it's a mean gull too. But nice, rich yellow bare parts on the ring-billed gull. California gull has a red and black on the bill. That always stands out. Not always so easy to see the red maybe, but often it is red and black, and it has a dark eye. So that imparts a certain look, just those 2 color combos right there. It is a kind of long build and has dull colored legs relatively often. It has a certain posture. All the gulls have a certain shape and posture, but California's, they slouch. Their back end kind of tilts down toward the ground, like they're relaxed, like they're cool. I don't know what it is, but there's a California slouch. I think that Rich Stallcup, late great Rich Stallcup, gets credit for California slouch. But anyway, we're going to use it tonight. And then we have our herring gull. It's mean looking. That very pale eye gives it a mean look. The sloping forehead. It's kind of a medium stout bill. The Iceland gull is rather similar to herring gull, but look at the effect that the dark eye gives it. Some eyes are rather dark, some are paler, but it gives it, along with that rounded head, a much more gentle appearance. And it has rich pink legs, and its bill is a little bit smaller, slighter in girth than the herring gull bill. There we have a California gull behind, and you can see that combo of the 2 colors on the bill and the dark eye. And even the mantle being a little bit, the upper parts being a little bit darker gray, setting it off as distinctive. All right, so the glaucous gull, you know, I think they look kind of dumb. These young birds, the adults look mean. They have a very pale eye and they look like no business mean. But the young birds, they look kind of dumb. And maybe they are, I don't know. But they're very pale, not actually white, very pale, and they have kind of a blocky head with that pale bill with a dark tip. All right, so the lesser black-backed gull, it looks fierce. It's got this pale eye with a dark surrounding and very dark above, yellow legs, stout, bright bill. So it looks a little bit different from everything else we've seen before, right? And notice just how that the eye and its coloration around there gives it a certain impression. The great black-backed gull, mean, hulking, a big old bruiser, massive, bright bill. It's really blackish above, shade darker than that lesser blackback. You can appreciate that in this picture. With that big bill, it's kind of heavy, and the legs you can't see here, but they'll peek. And it's a kind of a darker eye. So we have that light eye on the lesser blackback. So even if the bird's sleeping, though, we can see one difference, right? We'll come back to that later. So each of these birds has its own look. So let's start with a little more detailed look at the short-billed gull. And this is one that we always enjoy seeing because we don't have very many of them around. And ring-billed gull is our comparison, of course, for the short-billed gull. It's a lot like a little ring-billed gull that's kind of simplified and made dainty and sweet. So here's a beautiful picture here on the upper left. Thank you, Dave Prentice. You can see all the comparisons you need to see for these adult ring-billed and short-billed gulls. The short-billed gull is smaller, it's slighter, the bill is littler, it does not have any pronounced black marking. There is a little dusky there, it's typical of wintertime. It is a shade darker than the ring-billed gull. They're both facing the same way, so we know we could kind of trust that. And so really excellent comparison. When we look at the lower pictures of the short-billed gull, we can see that kind of dark eye and that kind of dove-like appearance, that dainty look with the rounded head and the dark eye. The bill markings on the short-billed gull vary a little bit during the winter. Generally, there really isn't a lot there, and what is there is kind of dusky, but sometimes there can be definitely some blackish markings there, and so you want to just be aware of that. They don't really look like the ring on a ring-billed gull. Notice all the white in the primaries, these big white mirrors on 9 and 10, primaries 9 and 10, out in the short-billed gull. Should you see one flying away or maybe stretch his wings out, you'll appreciate that because it does look different than a ringbill. So the first cycle birds on the right, you notice I put a couple ring-billed gulls in here to have as a comparison, first cycle ring-bills. These guys look a lot alike, but the differences in shape and bill are still there, bill size. But look, the bill pattern looks a lot alike, but the shape is different. The head shapes are different. And this one has a little more of a kind of darkish markings around the eye, giving it that gentle look. But here's the big difference that you can pick out when you're scanning. The first cycle short-billed gull is much browner than the first cycle ring-billed gull, which is already molted a lot farther along its journey, in its molt journey. The short-billed gull has a long migration right off, and it doesn't molt early during following fledging like the ring-billed gull does. So it still comes to us being pretty brown, a lot more brown on the head and brownish mixed in with the gray here, and just generally a lot of brown on the body, which you can't see so well there. You get a sense of it to the right. So that's an important difference on the short-billed gull when you're trying to pick one out. Now you can see why they call it the short-billed gull. Obviously, it just has a really, really short bill. All right, now we're getting down to the good stuff here. California gulls. Notice I see the California slouch right away when I'm looking at these birds. The rear end's kind of tilted downward, like, hey, so that's pretty good. So beautiful adults on the left, first cycle on the right. The California is kind of our in-between gull because it's bigger than a ringbill, but it's smaller than a herring and all the rest of the big four-year gulls. It is a four-year gull, but it's smaller than the herring gull and the other big ones that we're going to be looking at tonight. So it's kind of in between, and it's one of our darker mantled gulls. So, we kind of go all the way from a bunch of lighter ones like the ring-billed and the herring to some dark extremes like the lesser blackback, but then in the middle is the California gull, which is a little darker than a herring, a little darker than Iceland, and that California slouch posture I'm mentioning. The bill is longish and it has black and red, right? Uh, the uh, the bill, black may be more or less obvious on the bill, but it always forms a certain distinctive shape that's characteristic of the California gull. A little thicker on the lower mandible, thinner on the upper mandible. It's not a ring in the same shape exactly as a ring-billed gull's ring. And so it's black there on both mandibles, and it always has some red. The red is going to be more subdued in the non-breeding time than it is late in the winter or during the breeding season. So that dark eye is a real good thing for California gull. And notice the winter head markings are often extensive and they often accumulate towards the back of the lower part of the nape. You can see on this left-hand adult, upper left, and this one that's slouching in the middle there. The gray kind of accumulates down there, or might be rather extensive. All right, so our first cycle bird, one of the things that's distinctive about the California gull when they're pretty new, but not brand new, is that they're cinnamon colored. So you can see that up here in this top first bird as kind of a little cinnamon tone, and then that wears away as we get into fall. They have a long pale bill with a distinct dark tip. It actually looks a lot like the bill pattern of a glaucous gull or certain ages of a herring gull, but a certain pale bill on an all brown bird with a distinct black tip is characteristic of a first cycle California gull. They have not a lot of pale out in the primaries when they're flying. So if we look at this open wing here, we see their this little window here is pretty drab. So they come out looking kind of a dark bird in flight. So here we have California in the back standing with some ring-billed gulls. Pretty easy just to appreciate the impression that the eye gives, even in a picture that's not totally clear, can't see everything. You can see what, and this mimics what you see in the field, right? You can't see things so clearly all the time, often because of distance, but the pale eye gives a different impression than a dark eye does. So soak that in and notice the different color of the upper parts between these two gulls. California gull's darker. You know, about this picture, we can't see anything real well, but we can see if we look, we can apply our technique of looking for a different color gray and see that some of these are definitely paler, some are darker. We know California gull is a darker mantled bird. Ringbill is very pale. This is also small, so we're thinking ringbill. There's a bigger one in the back. So maybe we'll lean toward herring without any further info. And indeed, you can look at the eye on these two birds in this not so good picture, you know, in terms of quality, and appreciate the pale eye impact versus a dark eye impact at a distant view. You can even pick up the red and black on that California gull's bill, right? Long, slender bill, red and black. So you can see these things far away. There we go, herring, California, ringbill, all lined up for us. How about this view? You can get a really nice appreciation of the extensive gray that's often on the hind neck of the California gull, which this group is all adult California gulls with that beautiful gray with one lesser blackback gull mixed in. Much darker, different looking impression of the head all around, right? All right, so let's take a step back and we're going to go back now to looking at actually forward because we're dealing with the California gulls. And we're going to look at these progression through the years. And I want to take this kind of quickly and go back and look at the video for a little more detail. But here's what you have to appreciate. Cycle 1, all brown. Bum, 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 all brown. Cycle 2, they have a gray back and they're lightening up, but they're dirty. Cycle 3, they look a lot like an adult, but things aren't quite right. They're missing extra white. They're missing proper colors on the bill and legs and so on. Adult, they look really nice, really sweet. So gulls are very dapper looking birds. So you would see brown, then a gray back, then like an adult, but not quite. Then there you have it. So that's the progression in a 4-year gull. And that applies to all these different 4-year gulls. And the key things you want to appreciate is that one of the key things is that when they get this gray in the back, it's the same gray, realizing that photos don't always quite match their exposure and all of that lighting, but it's the same gray as the adult. So you can use that as an ID point for these second and third cycle gulls. And the same features of shape, bill size and shape, and the shape of the bird, the size of the bird are going to apply for those in-between birds. So you've already got a lot of clues there to work with to help you get the identification correct. So here's one that everybody wants to see is the Iceland gull. That's because they're not so easy to pick out. They're not so easy to find. They're not really common here in Colorado. We are living right along the Front Range here in a little zone where they occur with some regularity, kind of isolated from a lot of other areas in the continent where they're regular, but they're not numerous here. And where you find the Iceland gulls, especially where gulls are gathering in such a degree, there's often winter, open water, ice edge, and gulls are there in good numbers, and you start to get some variety. And what I've learned from being out in the field with people and listening to people talk about these gulls is that while the Iceland gull is a regular gull that occurs, people see a lot more of them than there really are. Take that to heart because it's a truism. but they are there, and you can tell them apart. One of the main challenges that we have is that they do look rather similar to a herring gull in some respects, and to some of the other gulls that are rare, but we're not going to worry about those. And we also tend to see them at some distance where it's hard to fully appreciate some of the details that we can appreciate in our bird bombs here tonight. So let's take a look at these adults on the left. It's a little smaller than a herring gull on average, keeping in mind there's some variation. Females are littler than males, but they're a little smaller than a herring gull and a slightly darker gray tone. The bill is more slender, the head more rounded, giving it a kind of a gentle look. The eye is usually dark or dull yellow. It's actually kind of flecked with little dark specks, and that's what creates that. But some of the eyes are fairly pale, but it's almost uh, very rarely like the white sort of staring eye of a herring gull. So the legs on the I always want to say Thayer's gull, and I might slip and say Thayer's. The legs on the Iceland gull are a bright pink, kind of a rich pink, richer than the herring usually. I used to always hear it called bubblegum pink, but I always think all bubblegum's pink. I don't know what that means, but bright pink. And the primaries, if you can compare them, herring to Iceland side by side, they are a little bit less black. That's hard to appreciate when you see the bird by itself or in certain lighting conditions. But what's really important is the underside of the wingtip is much paler than on a herring gull. So look at the underside here where this bird's holding its wing out. Just on the middle part of these adult pictures, you can see how pale, not a lot of black down there. And the same picture I showed you earlier, the black is just limited to the tip area of the primaries. So most of that is really pale. That's a real difference. There's also some differences on the upper wing profile here. I'm not going to go into those right now. So the bill on the Iceland gull is usually just all red. There's usually no black there on an adult, unlike a herring in the wintertime. And we talked about the primary. So now we have our first cycle bird on the right. More frosty looking often than a herring gull. I find the patterning to be very fine on the Thayer's Iceland gull. The primaries are brown, not blackish. So the herring gull first cycle primaries are not quite black, but they're blackish. And on the Thayer's Iceland gull, they are brown. All right, so that's a difference. And notice on these primaries, there are these nice pale fringes, more obvious on some birds, but usually evident on a first cycle bird. You can see it over here on the upper right as well, over here lower right a bit. These pale edges along the primaries stand out pretty well. On the darker blackish wingtips of the herring gull, the pale edges are much less evident. There's usually a little bit there, but look at that pattern. It stands out as you're scanning and looking at the tips of wings, maybe on birds, you can pick that out. Because right away you're going to go to herring gull because it's all brown, but what's different, right? That's one thing. The flying birds, I'll just backtrack. Flying birds, notice this big, broad, pale window here extending out onto the darker outer primaries, and you get this kind of lined appearance. But that pale window bleeds all the way out onto these primaries, and the underside of the wing is quite pale on the Iceland gull. So here I have that beautiful adult Iceland again, and spreading its wingtips a bit. Remember, the tail is not the black part. Tail's actually this white bit that's sticking out. Here's the upper side of the left wing. Here's the underside wingtip of the right wing. See that paleness there, because there's very little black that shows as the feathers are folded together there. So that's the really good field mark. You can even see that when the bird's perched if you're kind of close enough to appreciate that. So here's a good comparison: Iceland and herring together, and our Thayer's Iceland, and side by side, picture for picture. Keeping in mind, you can't control the lighting all the time, but you can get an impression of, especially upper left here, the eye color, the bill size, bill coloration, black on the bill on that herring gull, the kind of darker eye, the the mantle color, you can even get a little bit of an impression of in these different pictures. The herring's always kind of looking a little bit paler in the gray. And as we look at the young birds down on the bottom, we can look at these dark blackish herring gull primary tips with a little bit of pale showing and compare that to those nice pale fringes on the browner Iceland gull primary tips. And again, in flight, a lot of pale extending all the way out onto the primaries. On the herring gull, less pale and it's more blackish out on the primaries. So some differences you can try out in the field. Good luck. All right, so I love lesser blackback gulls because they're not common and they're really rare back in California, even more so when I still lived there than they are now. But you can they're not common, but you can find them, and so it's a little bit of variety, and they look really cool, I think. So the adults are similar in size to a herring gull. They often stand apart from the other gulls or on the edge, and somehow they look extra big because of that. But that very dark upper parts also really help set them apart. And they're different in that they have very dark upper parts and yellow legs. And so this is a gull that is a big gull that has yellow legs. So that's a difference there. And combined with that dark upper parts really gives them a different look. And they have a pale eye like a herring gull. And notice that around the eye, there's some dirty, dark smudges. It almost looks like they've got black eye bruises, right? So these gulls have been punched in the eye by the bigger great blackback gulls, and it really shows that way. But it kind of helps give them that kind of fierce look, that darkness there with the yellow eye, and that stands out at a great distance along with the other features that we see. Often they're very dirty headed during a good part of the winter, getting nice and white. Late in the season, it's usually the darkest gull around. So you look out in the flock, you see something really dark. Your mind's got to go there first before you go to the big one. And it's the only of the big gulls that we expect to see that has yellow legs. All right, so our first cycle birds are different from the herring gull because they're not as brown. Remember, also the bill here is bigger than on the herring gull, and so it has a different look on this young bird. You have this big black, kind of massive bill, and the head is pretty pale. It's still kind of brown overall, the bird, right? So these first cycle birds, even though it's pale on the head and underneath they're kind of pale compared to the herrings we saw before, it's still kind of brown overall. There's no gray patch here. It's still brown on the back. These are 1-year-old birds, no gray in these 4-year-old birds. But that kind of paleness and the dark highlights on that overall grayish and white aspect bird are distinctive for our lesser blackback gull. Not too different from the great blackback, which has an even gianter bill. I threw in a couple second cycle birds with graybacks down below, and you can compare there with the California dark eye there on that California. All right, here we have kind of a typical view of a flock standing out on the ice, and just see how those dark birds stand out from everything else. Everything else much paler, so our eyes go right to those, and we think of our lesser blackback with the ring bills. Here we have lesser blackback on the left, and it can sometimes, if the lighting is wrong or the angle is such, take a look at this California gull on the right. It looks really dark, doesn't it? But that's just because the lighting angle is fooling us. So always want to be thinking about that. You can see though the pale eye with the dark bruise around it on the lesser blackback compared to the dark eye on the California. You can compare the bill patterns, the bill color. The one is a little bit brighter, and so on. This is a lesser blackback late in the season that's pretty pale on the head. Here we have a mixed group. And again, you can apply the technique of looking for things of different sizes and different patterns. So give away lesser blackback at the center, but what else do we see? We see some things in the back that look different with extensive dark on the head. They're pretty little. Some other gulls that are smaller, but even bigger than those guys here. And then several kind of medium-sized large gulls with a lot of dark markings on their head. We can only see one face that has a dark eye. So we can see we've got 4 species right there to enjoy, just picking them out. Not this time of year with those Franklin's gulls there. So let's move on to the 2 that are kind of rare, always a treat to find. Sometimes there's just like one great blackback gull in Colorado, Murray down at Lake Pueblo, who's been there for decades. And these pictures of adult gulls are all of Murray down there. Sometimes there's more than just that one great black in Colorado, but they're always rare. And the Glaucous gull, while not unusual, is also on the rare side. And a treat to see these 2 big guys. So the Glaucous gull is big and stout. It's very pale to whitish with white to whitish primaries. Notice that if you look close, it's not actually white. The first cycle Glaucous gulls are kind of tan. They're mottled. There's more detail here I want to go into, but on the wing and on the body, they're mottled with this brown that's going to wear away to a very whitish looking bird, by the time we get to March. But if you look closely at this time of year, you'll see they're not actually white. If you see something that is actually white, you always want to think about an abnormally plumaged bird. But if all the parts fit, including the pale bill with a pink, well-demarcated dark tip and the blocky head and kind of dumb appearance, this is a blockhead gull. Here's you can see out in a flock, it just stands out as a really pale gull. Notice that dark tip on a pale bill. You can see even on a bird that's not so clearly seen or at a distance. Here's a bird that's a second cycle bird. Hard to even appreciate that, but notice it doesn't have that well demarcated tip anymore. That black's going to eventually all disappear as an adult, and it's already got a gray back, second cycle gray back. Look at those white wingtips. We don't see them like that in Colorado too often, but occasionally we do. And should you be fortunate enough to see an adult, which is not impossible, but really rare, it's going to look like that. Isn't that a beautiful bird? All right, so on the right, our great black-backed gull is the big bruiser. Its bill is giant compared to our others, and bright yellow on the adult, often that kind of blackish aspect of the gray above, and the head is clean. So in the wintertime, remember, the lesser black-back head becomes marked, but the great black-back head is clean. So that's the difference there. You can see even if the gulls are asleep and you're not sure about your gray tone or whatever, you can look for that difference. The first cycle birds have that same giant all black bill and same giant size, and their body is kind of whitish, even more so than on the lesser blackback, but with that same kind of speckled dark and light pattern above. Less of a brown first cycle bird than a herring gull for sure, but still in that kind of not clean adult look that the first cycle birds have. So there we see one with an adult herring on the lower right. And here perched at Lake Pueblo, dead fish on the shore with the great black-backed gull in control on the left and the lesser black-backed gull on the right. Note the leg color differences, the eye color differences, the mantle tone is hard to appreciate in this particular picture. They're not quite oriented the same angle, I note. So some cool things to compare right there. One has a clean head, one's dirty. All right, so I can't go through this bird bombs without bringing up the H word. We have to say something about hybrids. And the words I want to say are these. Let's keep mum about it. We don't really need to say anything about hybrids much tonight because you're not so likely to see very many of them. Yes, they are there. And once you know all these other gulls well, you're going to start to pick out more. But often the hybrids are things we don't really need to worry about because they're not going to get in our way here in Colorado. Not so much the case in California where, say, Western glaucous wing hybrids are very common in some coastal areas. But here in Colorado, there aren't so many around. And if you come to a bird you can't figure out, it's okay not to put a name on it. So sometimes the hybrids are going to be ones that aren't going to fit the puzzle pieces that I just laid out for those various species. There are several different hybrid gull combos, according to eBird, that have been reported in Colorado. And these two highlighted in blue, both involving herring gull, are the two that are most prevalent. The herring cross glaucous wing and herring cross glaucous. That's all we need to know. A little more detail there on the bottom, but let's forget all about the hybrid gulls. And let's just kind of summarize this part here by thinking about looking at gulls out in the field. They're going to be at a distance. Here we're not got Aptos Creek mouth there on the left-hand side there in the winter in California. That's a gull reunion after a gull program I did. We had a gull reunion field trip. A lot of fun out there. But during fall and winter, the vast majority of our Colorado gulls are going to be ring-billed gulls. We know that. So we want to find something in addition to ring-billed gulls. Can you pick out something different? And then if you find something that's bigger than a ring-billed gull, well, why isn't it a herring gull? That's going to be our default. And so you can consider different features if you're looking at adult gulls. And some of these features overlap, but I kind of laid these out here. And ultimately, some things you want to do is you want to use a scope. You're not going to enjoy your gull watching nearly so much, and sometimes not at all, if you don't have a scope to help make it work. There are some locations you can get close enough, binoculars will be okay, and maybe you can pick out things. But for studying and appreciating things, you wanna use a scope, and you want to look for things that are a different size. As you're looking across a group of gulls, look for something that looks different in its size, in its gray tone, in the eye color, the head markings, the bare part color. Those things seem like details, eye color, bare part color, but when you're scanning across a flock and looking for something different, that's what you're doing, and it will stand out. And look for brown ones because those are sometimes going to lead to gold, so to speak, of something interesting. All right. So now it's time to let it fly. So I'm going to put Laura Stedman on the hot seat with a few slides that she really hasn't studied and doesn't join us here, Laura. She doesn't really know necessarily what she's going to deal with, so we can appreciate that. Okay, great. All right. So Laura, what I want you to do here is just not with all these gulls flying. That's our background. But I'll put up some pictures. Gonna put, yeah, put up some. But we know what they all are, right? We know what they
I
are.
mean, they're probably ring-billed.
Yeah,
There might
probably
be a
at least
herring gull down there in the
maybe. Yeah.
corner. Yeah, right.
But I'm gonna put up some pictures and just see if you can just name the species and a few key points that caught your attention.
Okay, cool. First thing I see with that one is the dark back. So I know I'm looking at a black back gull. I see the smudging on the head, and we just talked about how Murray is really the only great black back gull to worry about in Colorado. And he's got an all white head like
Yeah,
other great black gulls. This is probably a lesser black back gull.
excellent, excellent. So what do you think here?
Oh gosh, well, I see a yellow eye. I see kind of a mean look, and I see some red and some black on that bill. It's a longish bill. I'm gonna go with herring gull on that one.
You're going good, great. Yeah,
Whew.
mean, definitely
All
mean.
right.
Yeah, all right. Whoa,
Ooh,
this one's different.
This one's like real pale. I see a little bit of that, like we talked about winter smudging. It's kind of like a little smudgy on the head, but overall pretty clean.
Yeah,
Pink bill with that black tip. Um, I went Glaucous. Is
that's
Glaucous?
right. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I don't know if I've actually seen one of those, but
Oh, well,
those are
this,
tough. Yeah,
late winter is a great time to see the glaucous gull because that's kind of their peak. So February is really a good time. So you haven't missed your chance for this
it's
year.
cold.
Well, yeah, but the gulls will warm you up.
That's true.
Uh,
Well, yeah,
well, the
yeah,
concept might.
yeah.
Afterward at home, you'll be warm.
I'll be
Let's
at
put
home.
it that
Yeah,
way.
yeah, yeah.
All right, so what do you
This
got
one
here?
just looks cute.
Yeah,
There's no ring on the bill, so it's not a ring bill gull. It's kind of smudgy overall. It's got a pale eye, so that's not a Mughal, but a short-billed gull.
that's what we call them now. Yeah,
Yeah.
it really does look kind of like a dove, don't you think?
Yeah, it's a cute. It's just got
Yeah.
like a cute look.
Yeah, we need more of those around.
Yeah.
All right, how about this one?
Oh, ooh, okay. So also like no ring on the bill, so not a ring bill gull. It's got a red spot. Doesn't have any black on it, so I don't think it's a California gull. It's got a dark eye.
If there was black,
Uh,
if you were black in a dark eye, you might be thinking about a California.
Yeah, if the gray is like, I don't know, kind of like a lightish medium tone. We've already done
Don't worry what we've
what's
already
left?
done. Yeah.
Iceland?
Yeah.
Iceland.
All right, cool. Well, that's a pretty good job there. Excellent. All right, so now we have two different pictures. Look at
All
number
right.
one on the left here. We've got some
Number one
gulls.
on the left. The
Yeah,
first thing I kind of start seeing is that these gulls all kind of look the same. They've all
yeah.
got kind of the same color leg. I don't even know what color that is. It's not pink. It's uh
Maybe yellowish.
it's yeah, like maybe
This one kind of
yellowish,
looks
but like
yellowish.
maybe pinkish in the back there. I don't know, but
Yeah.
the bills all look the same. They all have a spot that's dark. I can't really tell, at least on my computer screen, if they look like they have red on them or not, but I can't rule that out. the backs look kind of dark. And they kind of look like they're in a little bit of a different position there. And they do kind of have that like kind of angled down. I guess I'm reversing myself, so like angled down. So
Oh, they're slouchy.
yeah, they're kind of slouchy. So let's call those California gulls.
Oh yeah, so that I do see red on my computer monitor.
Okay.
So it is there, and that dark eye combo with the red and black and the slouch. Yeah, cool, excellent. So what about over on the right side? We actually did look at this
Oh,
picture in the prior part of the show,
oh,
but
did we? There's
there was
so
a lot
many
of
pic
pictures.
so many pictures and it's like so much to
Whoops,
absorb. Yeah.
I even gave the answer there, so I clicked too fast.
Oh no.
You probably didn't see. So
I
we can.
was
But what do you notice? What do you notice about these?
yeah, so I see like the first thing I see is that that gull in the back is darker on the back.
Right.
Right. And so that's probably a lesser black-backed.
Because it's really dark.
It's really dark. It's not all the way black.
Yeah.
And I can't really see the leg color on it, but we'll start with like lesser black-backed on that
Right.
one.
Good.
And then the other gulls are lighter, but a, they're not like several steps lighter. They're like a
Not
step
like
lighter. Like they're
not like
still kind of
ringbill pale.
darkish. They have a dark eye, and then they've got like that bill with like kind of dark on the end of it. So I would say that's a lesser black-backed with a group of they look a little maybe like they're a little smaller than the lesser black-back too. So I would say there's like those are also California gulls probably.
Right. And notice that really extensive gray marking on the nape, the
Oh
hind
yeah,
part of the
yeah,
neck
yeah.
there is often something that they show. Cool. Excellent. So, all right, so you're getting warmed up. So now we have three different images,
Oh
and there's
boy.
several gulls in the upper left picture, but there's not necessarily so many species. I'll let you figure it out.
Oh,
Oh, sorry, the number two is a little blurrier than I wanted here on the full screen, but
nice.
if we look
Yeah,
at
yeah.
number one,
If we look at number one, that gull in the bottom left corner, I see black and red.
yeah,
So that's probably a California gull.
that makes a reference for us right there.
Yeah. There's kind of another one over to the right corner of that photo there. Yep. Um, and then the two kind of behind that one both their heads look kind of big. They have a darker back. They have yellow legs. And so for those, I'm leaning lesser black-backed. They've also got
Well,
some smudginess. Their eyes are smudgy.
so these two to me, they don't look quite the same, but I think
Okay,
there's just well, you can see the legs
looking
are
at that
yellow
one.
here and the yellow eye, so I definitely agree there. But
Yeah,
this gray isn't quite as dark, but
that's true.
the birds angle quite a bit differently, so we're not quite sure. But it's a little
Yeah,
tricky,
not
and
sure
you
about
don't
that
have to
guy.
identify all these, but I'm going to tell you what I think
Oh,
this is I know it's a California gull.
is it?
It's
Okay.
a second cycle California with the gray back, and here is I'm pretty sure that's a juvenile. There's definitely a
Yeah,
juvenile in the
yeah.
first cycle California back here with that black tip on a pale bill. But anyway, that
Oh,
doesn't matter. So that's the
yeah.
good thing. So sometimes, it can be a little hard to decide. But so what about
Yeah.
number two here?
Number
Um,
two. Okay, so again, I see that dark back. I kind of see the smudgy eye. So I'm thinking, and I'm seeing like smudges on the nape on the head. So I'm thinking lesser that's hard to say,
Lesser
lesser
back. Yeah,
black-backed
it is.
on that one. And then the one in front of it is significantly smaller. It has a pretty clean gray back and that bill. Is that a ring-billed gull? A young ring-billed gull?
Uh, yes, yes, it is.
That's
Yeah.
tricky. Yeah.
So
That was a tricky idea. I feel like yeah, it doesn't quite look adult from that photo being a little blurry, but
well, no, it's not.
no.
You can tell by the bill also that's
Yeah.
gonna help give it away in the eye. But yeah, the mantle colors are very different between those two, quite an extreme.
Yeah.
How about number three?
Number
Uh,
three, gosh. Okay, so we've got three goals here. We'll start with that. We've got three for eBird. The back one, I see gray on the back, doesn't look particularly dark. I see a ring bill, pale eye, so I think I'm gonna start with calling that a ring bill gull. The two on the front look at different head shapes. So the one on the right has a gray back. It's got that mottling, kind of the smudging on the nape.
Yeah.
And I think I see some black and some red on that one. So that's kind of leading me to start thinking California gull.
Okay.
And then the one on the front left is a much younger gull, right? It's a
Yeah.
different cycle gull. It's like brownish and black and um what is that thing? Um the head shape, like looking at the head shape of the what I think is a California gull and this one on the left, it looks different. So I'm gonna guess that might be a herring gull just based on the shape.
And it's hard to evaluate from this picture. I think the bill is kind of stout, maybe for a herring gull. And notice
Hmm.
that kind of bruising around the eye. Now,
Yeah.
some of these bigger gulls, you need to they take a while to go through their molts and acquire different things. This is actually a second cycle lesser blackback.
Oh, okay.
And it's got the eye is turned pale and the bill is largely pale at the base instead of largely black. And so those are some differences between first cycle and second cycle. And it's a lot paler on the body, but it's still kind of brownish looking and dirty. But anyway,
Uh-huh.
that's a lesser blackback. But
Oh,
the
cool.
bill size. So, but anyway, you got it as one of the bigger 4-year gulls. A herring also bigger than the California. So that's
Yeah.
not a bad conclusion there. There's one last one here.
Oh gosh. That's a dark back. It's got yellow legs. So if we're thinking about what we have in Colorado normally,
Don't think
that
I might
yeah,
don't.
that like points me towards lesser blackback, right? Of like
But what if
a
I
dark
wanted
back, yellow legs.
what if I wanted to
Um,
trick you?
if you want to trick me, then this is like one I'm probably trying to find Nick Komar's email for or something.
It looks like it's in
What is
really
this?
bright sunlight,
It
doesn't it?
is, it's very
And the
bright.
bird is angled in such a way that the part of the back we can see, the upper parts are in the shadow
Extra
of the
dark.
bird,
That's
so they're going to
true.
look extra dark on an ice setting. And
Got a very
so
yellow bill.
I would be wary of how dark that bird really is.
Oh,
So what else can you see? So you saw yellow bill.
yeah. I see a yellow bill. I feel like I almost see a very thin ring around the bill. And the eye is very dark, and I want to say that there's some red around it. The eye,
Yeah, I
maybe.
think you're right.
So is this just like a really badly lit ring bill gull?
No, no, no. So if
No?
the eye's dark and you've
Oh, the
got,
eye's dark.
right. So that's not a bad conclusion because the legs are yellow. And I didn't really
Mm-hmm.
mention earlier, but with California, some of them are clearly yellow legged. A lot of
Ah,
them are kind of grayish or blue, greenish kind of leg. But anyway, it's California. It's tricky. In one picture, the bird in life would move and you would have a different sense of it. But in the
for
photo, it's
sure.
extra tricky and it's deceptive. I wanted to just deceive you with the dark back color, which I did. And that's something to
Yeah,
keep
for
in mind
sure.
because when you're out there and so here's a bird all by itself on the ice. Oh my goodness, that looks really dark. It must be. Then you want to look a little closer at the details
Yeah, for
and also
sure.
consider the circumstances. All right, so who looks different in this group? Oh wait, it's not really fair. Let's take a better scope view here.
Thank you.
And here we have just a little group of gulls or part of a bigger flock probably,
Hmm.
and you can look
Hmm.
for different size or different gray tone, different head or bill pattern might catch you. Don't worry
Yeah.
about calling out all of them, but can you
Okay.
pick out anything
Okay.
different or
Well, let's start with the baseline that like most of them are probably rainbow gulls,
hey, that's
right?
a great
So
way to start.
we'll start there, and then the first thing I see is that there's two kind of on the right half of the photo that are darker, significantly darker, right? Like I can pick that out with my eye
Yeah,
without even
right.
pulling up my binoculars. That one in the back for sure looks bigger, so that's probably going to be a lesser black beckle. Looking at it a little closer,
Uh-huh.
its head looks a little smudgy. Um, that one down to the right of the one in the far back. Looks like, at least from this angle, looks like a similar dark tone. You know, it looks a little smaller the way it's sitting, but I kind of want to like watch that and see what's going
Yeah.
on there.
But
Um,
the mantle color is a very good clue, so
yeah,
don't forsake
yeah,
that,
yeah.
because I know you're suggesting it's also lesser blackback is what I'm hearing you,
Yeah,
the
I
way you're
think that's
telling.
probably what it is.
Okay.
And then looking at the rest of them, like none of them look super small. Um, there's one on the left that looks kind of funky. It's kind of top second from the left. It's like maybe a touch darker than the ones around it, and its head looks kind of funky. So, thinking about the gulls that we have that we expect, California gull has like a slightly darker back than ringbill gulls. So like that's where I would be leaning, and I'd be trying to like get my scope to focus on that one a little bit.
That's great. I like the funky head. That's a new
Yeah,
term.
it's like got something going on with it.
Definitely, it's California. It's got something going on, that's for
Yeah.
sure. All right, so two questions here. Can you,
Oh,
one's kind of nuanced, if you can discern what season it is. Then if you can tell what any of these birds are, there's at least four different species of birds in this
four
picture.
species.
We can't
Okay.
see some all the way, but I think there's four.
Yeah. Okay. Well, so that big gull in the middle, it's got that big pink bill, the black tip. Uh, it's pale overall, and it has those bubblegum pink legs.
So it
So
is.
that puts us in a glaucous
Great.
gull sort of category there.
I agree with that.
Looking at the gulls in front of it, I see a ring-billed gull for sure down there, like down and just to the left. And it's got a bright red eye, or at least was it the orbital
There's something
lobe?
bright there. Yeah, the
Yeah,
orbital
there's bright
rim.
red there. So like that to me says like maybe this is like breeding season,
Cool.
or we're getting
Okay.
close to that. So we've got some ring bills.
What about
Uh, what is that behind all of them? Are those pelicans?
they are. They're white pelicans.
They're big.
So we know it's not winter.
Yeah. And then that gull kind of off to the left that looks young. It's got the black bill. It's very brown. It's got a smudgy eye, a dark eye. I don't know what that is.
Large dark bill with
Yeah,
that
large
that
dark
eye
bill.
the eye pattern going on a it's a first cycle bird, but it's not as brown, it's more whitish and blackish brown or whatever, right?
Uh-huh.
So
Yeah.
that actually is a lesser blackback there.
Okay.
And that eye smudging is kind of a good thing, kind of the look that it has. But springs happen to be in April at Cherry Creek, and with the pelicans in, and the ringbills are still with us. Those adult ringbills are going to go away. So once you get like even into May, they're
Uh-huh.
mostly somewhere else, and you start to get third cycle ringbills that are not going to go to the breeding grounds and so on. But anyway, it's another story. But this is April, so cool, excellent. And last little image here for our Let It Fly segment. And
February. Yeah, Aurora. Gosh. Okay. So again, like we'll start with the baseline that these are probably mostly ringbill gulls. So that kind of sets our baseline for like the gray color, right? We've got that one in the middle that's bigger and darker. It has a very dark bill. It's kind of a gray brown overall. The dark eye.
what
Yeah,
age?
that
So
one.
what age is that bird?
So that is because of the brown, it's like not quite an adult. So because it's bigger gull, what does that put it at? Like
Well, it's all brown,
it's
right?
all brown.
Doesn't have a
Oh, so
gray,
is
no
it
gray
is it
back.
pretty young? It doesn't have like the really dark
Well,
like
this
modeling.
remember that different species look a little different, right? And
Yeah,
we learned
right.
the herring gull's kind of dark, and the thayers look sort of definitely look brown, but maybe a little
Yeah,
paler, but they're definitely brown. This looks, it's all brown in the sense that there's no clean white, there's no gray
yeah.
back, right? So this is a first cycle. And so
Okay.
we found a brown gull as we're scanning, and then we try to put it into one of our holes. Herring gull hole is the first one, and right
Right.
away we're concerned because it looks really pale, and
Right.
there's no dark brown out here on the wingtip area,
None.
which is hard to see well, but I think we're looking at some primary tips right there.
Yeah, yeah.
And
So
they look
just
pale, but not white, but they look like kind of the same color as the rest of the bird. So it doesn't
uh,
match. It doesn't match any of the things that we've been talking about tonight. And
okay,
where I
that's
want
good because
to
I would.
yeah, and where I want to leave it with this is that you're going to encounter some things that don't fit
Yeah,
the pieces of the puzzle, and those are the ones that could be a different species. So we're not talking about glaucous wing gull at all tonight, but that's a rarity that turns up most winters, one or two, something to think about,
yeah.
or one of the hybrid gulls, or some variant of something normal. But you know what? Don't sweat it. Don't stress over it. Don't try to make it into something rare because you don't really know what it is. Just let it go. Take a picture, maybe study it further, but it's all right. So, all right. Thanks, Laura, for being on the hot seat in Let It Fly. And I want to thank all of the people who contributed photographs to this bird bomb. I really appreciate the photographers who share their images with me so that I can make bird bombs happen. Thank you so much. It wouldn't happen without you. Hopefully all the images are credited on each slide. And it's already time to look ahead to the next bird bombs coming up on February 15th. Colorado bird taxonomy made simple. So what this is going to look at is kind of how getting a sense of relationships of birds helps us actually with their identification. And we'll also look at it from a practical perspective of how do we actually interact with taxonomy, like when we're using eBird, for example. So hopefully a great informative bird bombs in February, Colorado bird taxonomy made simple. So now I'm going to stop screen sharing and then we can have any questions or comments people might have.
Yeah, definitely. If you have questions, please drop them in the Q&A and I'll watch that to ask David for sure. First off, I want to say, David, that I felt like the puns were really on point tonight. I appreciated them,
Thank you.
even more than usual. You mentioned that the Beach Boys look like gulls, but you didn't mention which ones you thought had yellow legs versus pink legs.
Well, some things I don't know.
That's fair. I was curious, we talk about gulls in terms of winter, right? And
Right, right.
most people who aren't birders, the first time they see it, they notice a gull because they've met me and all I do is talk about birds and they're like, oh, I saw a gull, a seagull in Colorado. Like, what's that about? Um, but why do we get these gulls in winter and not so much the rest of the year? Why do we get all the variation?
Yeah, so most of the gulls nest to the north here, the northern hemisphere gulls, most of at least the ones in the US, mostly nest up in the high northern areas or the northern portion of the continent, and somewhere else than Colorado. So we
Mm,
have really only the California gull that nests in numbers here in Colorado, but only at a couple few places in colonies, and then a few ringbills, a very few Franklins, but mostly so the variety of gulls during the late spring through the summer is much more limited, and then during the non-breeding season, gulls go away from their breeding areas to move to their wintering grounds and migrate through here and winter here, and so we get more variety.
mm. Okay, that makes sense. And we talked a little bit about sometimes you just can't figure out what that gull is, right? Either it's the lighting or it flies off before you really get a great view, or you're just not sure what it is. What's your advice on like how should we put that in eBird? For like, I don't know what this gull is, but I know it's a gull, and I know
Right.
some things about it, right?
Yeah, and there's some different options you might see on a checklist that come up. One is going to be listed as gull spa, which
Mm,
would be encompassing of literally of any sort of a gull, but it could be more specific in most cases in Colorado with Laris spa, which is the
Polaris.
genus Laris is most of our gulls. And so you could just leave it at that. Sometimes you'll see like a herring slash Iceland or something like that, a
Mm-hmm.
slash thing, which is meaning I think
Mm.
it's one of these two, but I don't know which.
Yeah,
And then there's hybrid things, but don't go there unless you really have some cause to be able to figure out what you're looking at
yeah,
in terms of reporting a hybrid. I would just say you can say Laris spa. So, and it's okay. You can just you might even just come up with an estimate. Oh, I looked at this flock and I probably can feel good about maybe 80% and that flock's 100 gulls. So I don't know. You can just come
yeah.
up with a percentage that way, but
80%
it's good
ringbills.
still to report them even if even if you don't know what they are.
Yeah, for sure. Cool. Let's see. Sarah has a question. She asks, if you could, you mentioned about ring-billed gulls as like kind of our most common species and how we have kind of the first cycle gulls and then we have the adult gulls and there's a lot of sort of mortality in between. Do you have any idea, like any concept of, obviously they're breeding, they're having lots of young ring-billed gulls for that first year in high numbers, but then there's the high mortality rate. Like what's that about? Do you know anything?
So generally speaking, the gulls that are newest into the world have the least experience with life. They're the most vulnerable in a lot of different ways. And during that first year of life, they're going to face a lot of hardships, of hunger, of weather situations, and all that that are going to be adverse. And so it's going to be especially taxing for these inexperienced gulls. And so there's a lot of them die. That's not unusual among young birds in various bird species. There's a lot of variation, but it's unusual to have a fairly high mortality rate in that first year because there's a lot of things going wrong in a gull's life in that first year. They're not being led by the hand like many of us human babies are as we go through life. So there's a lot going on there. And then as they get to the second year, they're able to survive better some of the situations that they deal with in the first year. And so the mortality rate drops substantially. Same thing again in that next year. And once they're an adult, of course, mortality still happens. A bird that's only 4 years old could die, but most of them will live to be fairly long-lived. Different larger ones longer, but you get up into the range of the 20 to 30-year range for some of those
Wow,
big gulls, so they can live a long time.
that's pretty cool.
Um,
Yeah, and Murray, the blackback gull, he's been coming to Pueblo for a long time, right?
Before you were born, yeah, could
Yeah,
be. Yeah, so
yeah.
a long time.
Yeah. Well, so speaking of Murray, I know that like I've been down there to see to Pueblo to see the gulls and to see Murray, the great blackback gull, and it is impressive
Yeah.
how big that gull is. So like if you haven't been down there, like I would recommend that as a thing to go see Murray, because it really is like, oh, that's a blackback gull, a greater blackback gull, not a lesser, right? But thinking about like, wanting to get out, like maybe not this weekend because of the low temperatures, but this winter when it's a slightly bit warmer than this weekend, like where should we be going to look for these gulls for
Um,
different stuff?
the best places are places that have some open water. And of course, most places now will have ice as well, but not completely frozen. Gulls like to gather at the edge of ice where there's fresh water for bathing and drinking and for generally loafing. They will gather out on ice, but they may be far away and not worth looking at. But if you can find a place that has open water, like a bubbler might leave something open, or there just
Oh,
might
wow.
naturally be an open area and those are where there's gulls. That's a good situation to find some variety. Aurora Reservoir, I think, is an excellent gull watching place in the metro region out there in Arapahoe County. Always lots of gulls there. You got to play with your timing of day and so on for good viewing, but that's a really good place. And if you just check in on eBird and look maybe for some of the less common species, maybe just search on Iceland gull on the species map and follow up on some of the points and look at the checklist and look for lists that have maybe thousands of gulls, like
Hmm.
hundreds of thousands of ring-billed gulls. and then maybe 10 to more herring gulls. Then you start to get some other things. Those are the great spots that are going to pull in some variety and give you a chance to see something. The landfills are good. There's not very many you can get into.
Mhm.
One up in Larimer has some viewing opportunities. It's
Yeah.
kind of advanced gull viewing, I think, going to a landfill because gulls are moving all over the place. There's a lot of gulls, and pretty much everything is in the mix, including hybrids and all that. So don't go there if you're faint of heart. You know, unless even if you're standing alongside an expert, you're going to get a headache. But it's still fun.
Awesome. Yeah. Dana mentioned, she said, thank you for the program, and that she's gonna go out and tie her scope to a cinder block tomorrow up in Loveland to try to find some goals. So
Good
that's a
luck,
great
Dana.
idea. Yeah. Thanks, Dana. David, do you have any are there any DFO goal field trips coming up? Last question for you.
Yeah, there's going to be a couple more too. I had to just cancel one for weather, but we have one next weekend that's full, and I'm going to put up at least one or two others that are called Gull Therapy, Gull focused, Gull ID focused field trip. And the idea is to take a little more time to focus, hopefully to find places that do allow some decent observation quality and some variety of gulls. So that's one opportunity. Watch for our DFO calendar for some trips, and any of our trips that other ones too might go to Aurora Reservoir, for example, and not say gulls in the title, but great opportunities to study gulls there. So any of our trips that look like they're going to reservoir areas, and if they think there's going to be good gull potential, then they probably are mentioning it in the description. Hopefully
Awesome.
everybody's going to look at gulls now. Really, it is the time. I mean, yes,
It
it's
is the time
cold
of
and
year
all
for
that,
it,
but
for
if you can
sure.
get a decent day and find a good spot, make the effort because it's a good time. It's kind of a
Yeah.
spectacle to think of all
Yeah.
these thousands of gulls that are here from far away. You know, the Iceland gull, if you finally find one, it's nesting about as far north as you can get on our continent. Take a look on your Merlin or in your field guide. It's impressive. So it's a real treat to see these world travelers.